My hot take is that this Daredevil run, it's kind of a bridge between like the old-fashioned Western sort of Silver Age style of writing comics to the modern age. He would get these imported Japanese comics. He couldn't read Japanese, but he marveled at how he could flip through the comics and he understood everything that was going on. The visuals were the most dominant part of the story. American comics, you couldn't tell what was going on without the dialogue. These are the layouts that he would hand Klaus Janson. And yeah, you could see that, especially here, like look at Elektra's face here. Miller has a long history with collaborators taking his sort of rough, almost ugly work and making it more appealing for mass audiences. When he isn't working with Farley or Janson, there's a bit of a fan backlash. I have this theory that there's two different ways of drawing fight scenes in comics.
Hey everybody, welcome to Ink Scribes, the comics podcast where we talk about the art and craft of comics. We're three artists who are lifelong friends, and we have unique artistic experiences which we'd like to share through this show along with the art and craft of comics. I'm Colin Singh. I've been reading comics my whole life. I love everything about them. I want to know everything about them, and I'm an aspiring comics illustrator myself.
And I'm Eric Zavadsky. I've been a professional working in the comic industry for about 7 or 8 years. We've been friends for a while, and this is we've had a group chat going for a bit, and so we decided it would be a lot of fun to put this up in video format and just hang out once a week and draw a bit and show off some of our work, and also talk about something we're very passionate about, which is comics and comic book storytelling.
My name is David Seguin. I've been a tattoo artist for 18 years now. I've taught some artists. I've fired some artists. I've basically built up a false sense of knowledge and artistic superiority, which I've learned is all nothing when I started trying to draw comics. But thankfully, it's given me some tools to be more critical about my own skills, and hopefully it will translate well into my own comic journey.
Yeah, so a lot of this show is the three of us talking about our specific artistic journey, and yeah, it'll be a bit of a vlog. But the first part of the show is just going to be us discussing comics art, and today we're talking about Frank Miller's first Daredevil run from the early 80s. So what was your guys' relationship with this run of comics?
Well, with Frank Miller in general, I got into Frank Miller through the Spawn versus Batman crossover. I think that was the first Frank Miller comic that I read. And then the Spawn issue that he did. Then after that, Sin City, I kind of worked backwards, I think, like whatever he was doing at the time. And then I worked back towards Daredevil, and I even tracked down some of his early Spider-Man issues too. But when I got there, so I was probably about 13 or 14. And like every time I go back to it, I still hits the same way as it did when I was a kid.
I got into Frank Miller basically through his the adaptations of his work, like the movies and stuff like that, 300, Sin City, and that, and started picking up the comics based on that after the fact, like as an adult. And so like this Daredevil stuff is relatively new to me, and I feel like it's a shame because it's fantastic. Reading it's Frank Miller writing, but like mostly was it Klaus Janson drawing, and it's freaking awesome. Like they have such great synergy, so I'm super glad I've been able to like get into it now and reread it.
Yeah, so my relationship, I read the Elektra saga when I was a kid. When I was a kid, they came out with these. So first of all, the Elektra saga came out in the 80s, which the Frank Miller kind of remixed all the Elektra scenes into one concise story. But then in the 90s, they reprinted the Elektra saga again and basically picked these up on the newsstand. So I didn't actually read the original Daredevil run until recently, which was the Elektra saga has a lot of jarring moments because he's edited it around. So sometimes you get like 1980 Miller art right beside 1982 Miller art, right next to 1981 Miller art. So it's very it can be a little jarring to read. But reading the actual run recently, it's a little more seamless because there's more of a gradual shift in the art. I can say I much prefer reading the original run of issues. My hot take is that this Daredevil run, it's kind of a bridge between like the old fashioned Western sort of Silver Age style of writing comics to the modern age. You can see a gradual shift in the storytelling and how Miller kind of invented the modern way of telling a story in comics, I think, which I'm going to go over. I've got a PDF here. I'm going to sort of go over and do a bit of a history of the run. And then after that, we're going to pick apart, the three of us are going to pick apart some scenes from the individual issues.
So the run started at issue 158. The issue previous was, so I think it was a two-parter story, and 157 was illustrated by Gene Colan.
Yeah, so he did about 32 issues, and the first 7 or 8 were written by Roger McKenzie, and then he took over the writing. So even when Roger McKenzie was writing it, he became kind of notable because he was playing around with the storytelling and a lot of the ways that you didn't see around that time, with maybe the exception of Paul Gulacy on Master of Kung Fu. And a lot of that comes from his influences outside of comics. Yeah, so around that time, he wanted comics to feel more like film. He wanted the pacing, the character acting, the staging, the lighting. He wanted it to feel more like film than what was traditionally in comics at that time. He was also influenced by manga. But yeah, you can see in this scene here, when it comes to the acting, like in this scene here where Ben Urich, the reporter, is showing him a photo. I think there's probably still too much dialogue, but there's an emphasis on the pacing and the acting in that scene about how it starts off with Daredevil in denial, and then him kind of crumbling and basically admitting, "Yeah, you're right, I am Daredevil."
Wearing
And
costume.
sorry,
Wearing his Daredevil costume.
oh, sorry,
I'm
sorry, admitting he's Matt Murdock.
Right.
Yeah, this is a scene where Ben Urich basically says, "Hey, I figured it out." And then, yeah, in this scene, you get like where he's watching his father in the ring. You get like if this were a film camera, it would be a slow pan into the audience and to see the son watching the father in the ring.
I love the silhouettes of the figures framing the brightly lit ring. It looks so cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really good comp there.
Very cinematic, like you're saying. That you could tell that was inspired by film for sure.
And yeah, so he was also very inspired by Bernie Krigstein. Have you guys read The Master Race by Bernie Krigstein? It's just like a 10-page short from EC Comics.
No, I haven't read that one.
I've read it, but it's been a while. I haven't come across it again. It doesn't stay with me.
Oh, no? Yeah, I mean, it's one of the most important short stories in comics history. It's basically an early attempt at experimenting with the form, specifically playing with timing through panel size and panel count in a way that hadn't been done before. And this in particular seems very inspired because it takes place in a subway, just like the particular scene that everybody remembers from Master Race.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you got a lot of interesting pacing again, like in this last page here where Ben Urich is deciding whether to print the story or not, and sitting there contemplating. It's around this time, I think it was very rare to get long silent scenes. For some reason, the writers just felt the need to put their stamp on every single panel.
He does reuse that technique of the man having the heart attack there in different forms. Like he'll do a guy climbing over a fence and then falling on the other side. Didn't someone get shot as well? And they tried running away. I think there's a couple of different layouts like that throughout the series. He keeps revisiting that technique, and it works really well each time.
Yeah, which modern Miller, he's all about the big bombastic image. So
Yeah.
modern Miller is all about 3-panel pages and 2-panel pages, and so when you're a younger man, you've got more stamina and more energy. And yeah, around this time, he was really going for it. He was hired to do this when he was like 20, 21 or so.
Amazing. But now we get
Yeah, just
Scrooge
stunning.
McDuck.
You're not a big fan of that Scrooge McDuck?
I don't know if anybody is.
I thought we were going to talk about that.
So this Elektra short he did. So in the middle of his Daredevil run, he got the opportunity to do a 10-page short in this Marvel magazine, completely black and white. This is the first time he got to ink himself. And he was inspired by manga at the time. He was reading a lot of, well, he wasn't reading the manga. He would get these imported Japanese comics. He couldn't read Japanese, but he marveled at how he could flip through the comics, and he understood everything that was going on. The visuals were the most dominant part of the story, and comics in American comics were like the dialogue was so important to the story that you couldn't tell what was going on without the dialogue. Yeah, so this 10-page short is significant because he decided to do a story in which there were no caption boxes and no thought bubbles. Yeah, it was mostly visually oriented and based around the dialogue, because back then there was thought bubbles everywhere. We were in everybody's thoughts.
It was the age of exposition.
Definitely. There was the comic writing back then was so, the extra caption boxes were kind of necessary because they would often have to explain deficiencies in the artist's storytelling. You wouldn't necessarily understand maybe how a character got from point A to C, and so they'd explain B by an awkward narration box. But even then, there must have been some sort of like insecurity on the writers' parts, because the writers would often just explain, they would explain the visual that you can see in front of your face. But he played around and learned a lot of lessons from this short, and then slowly, gradually brought those lessons into his Daredevil run.
Is that the same paper that I think you were telling me before that Kevin Eastman and Peter Laird used that same paper for Ninja Turtles at the time? No.
Yeah, I mean, then they were heavily inspired by this Frank Miller run, and so they wanted the.
I don't see it.
You don't see it. It's not obvious at all. In fact, they're reading this stuff. You can see there are Elektra poses, like where Elektra's jumping in the air, where I'm like, I have seen a Ninja Turtle have that exact same pose.
Yeah.
But like they were complete. I mean, the origin of the Ninja Turtles is like Daredevil's origin. Like the radioactivity, the radioactive stuff that gets spilled on Daredevil goes into the sewers. And but yeah, this paper, I'm not entirely sure. It says here graph tint blue dot shading mediums, but I'm not entirely sure of the process. But you would by putting a specific material on here, you would slowly reveal the gray. And yeah, it was just a very unique look. But apparently it was very toxic, which is why you don't. I think it's been banned, so you don't see it nowadays anymore.
This is why all our favorite artists are now crazy old men.
Yeah.
Okay, so this page is interesting. I just wanted to show it off because it's kind of like it's Miller doing the exact same page, but this is one side is Frank Miller from like 1980, and the other side is Miller from 1982. This was from a story that was sort of temporarily banned by the Comics Code Authority, and so they just shelved it for a bit. Roger McKenzie ended up writing. This is like Roger McKenzie's last issue, or was going to be. So written by Roger McKenzie, illustrated by Frank Miller. And then 2 years later, they finally dusted it off. They figured it all out, worked it out with the Comics Code, and then integrated the story back in. And by then, he was a different storyteller. You can see he's a little more graphic with his settings. He's a lot more literal with his setting choices in the basically the 1980 version. Yeah. Also, just a lot less caption boxes.
I was going to say it's significantly less cluttered.
And to be fair, in 1980, Marvel Comics were only 17 pages. But by the time we got to 1982, Marvel Comics were about 22 pages. So he had all this extra room. Like this was the last page in the original version, which was the original issue 167. Then when it became 183, he suddenly had more pages to play with, and so that expanded his ability to play with the pacing.
So he cut the panels by a third, and he cut the captions and dialogue by a third too, eh?
Yeah, and it just like flows a lot better as
Yeah.
well. And I mean, one looks like a Silver Age comic, even though it was in the Bronze Age. But one looks significantly more modern in its storytelling approach.
Absolutely.
Okay, what else do we got here? So yeah, this is the first issue that he wrote was 168, and so with the previous example I showed, that was Roger McKenzie writing the first bit and then Miller taking over. So I want to compare how Frank Miller was writing his own art in his first issue versus in his last issue, which you can see a lot of caption boxes and a lot going on. The fight scenes, though, there's still a lot of characters talking, but it's a little more sparse than the other pages. But still, he eventually reaches a point where like these characters don't have to be talking during fight scenes, which was in every comic back then. Yeah, and he abandons it a little bit here. This is Elektra's first appearance. So that was his first story, and then now I just want to show off. This is basically his second last issue, and you can see like he's really pared back the dialogue, and there's a lot more silent moments and a lot more playing around with pacing, and the panel count is significantly smaller.
Look at these pages.
Can we go back to 168?
Yeah.
So I'm just gonna make like on a side note for 168. I think before and after 168, besides maybe Daredevil #1, in terms of keys for key issues, key points of for example, like Amazing Spider-Man, Death of Gwen Stacy, sort of thing. I think 168. In fact, a lot of Miller's run is where the most significant keys happen.
That cover still stands out. Like if that cover was on the shelves today, I'd still want to pick it up. Like compared to a lot of modern issues, I'd have to pick it up and be like, "What is this book? That is a really great cover."
It's kind of like those old pulp covers of detective novels and stuff.
Yeah, it's freaking dynamic.
But it is interesting to note this is only his second most famous cover with lightning in the background. But yeah, I just wanted to show off how he evolved as a storyteller. And this was his last issue. He started using caption boxes a lot more than thought balloons, and even you can see the lettering is being integrated into the art. By this point, he has become a lot more clever with the how he integrates background and how he composes a page. Yeah, the backgrounds are very graphic, even just like that last page there.
It's so simple, but like that heavy use of black is such a great way to convey like the mood.
Yeah, I mean it's all about the mood basically.
It's very oppressive.
Like so now I want to talk a bit about the history of color with the book. So with issue 179, probably about halfway through the run, Klaus Janson began coloring the comic, which further brought a unified vision to the series. In my mind, the less credits on a comic, the more pure the vision. So with this issue, it was basically Miller, Janson, letterer Joe Rosen, and basically editor Denny O'Neil. But yeah, I just wanted to compare the newsprint with the modern reproduction, the remastering. And obviously, this newsprint was taken with a phone, and I think it's faded over time. Yeah, I just want to comment a bit on the how bright these remasters are.
They're
I think
bright.
I mean it's very very saturated. Yeah, I think when these comics were printed on newsprint, everything just kind of blended together in a nice way. These, like, you can see in the remastering, there's like looking at this guy's like forehead right here, you can see there's like hard cuts between the colors, whereas you look on this side, it like blends in.
It's a lot more subtle.
Yeah. Also, the newsprint is off white, and so when it's printed, you get you get everything sort of like blending together. I think, Dave, a couple episodes ago, you explained to me the process of glazing,
Right.
and I think the off-white newsprint kind of gives that effect a little. It brings like everything together.
It's a bit of a grayish tone, so gray creates color harmony. So because of like when you're showing the difference between the other page, which is like that very stark white, you don't get that kind of grayish tone of the newsprint that's off white that makes more color harmony. It mutes the tones and makes them all work together, kind of like glazing, like you're saying. But like you said, you don't see that harsh line between. They blend more together on the old newsprint than you do in the new digital side, the digital print there.
Yeah, yeah. Like looking again at that guy's forehead, it looks like a gradient,
Yeah.
whereas it doesn't look as much like a gradient in the modern remastering.
I think you should let everybody know, or at least mention that the one on the right is printed on glossy paper as well.
Yeah, yeah,
So-
yeah. That's a good point, because I think if it was printed on matte paper, it would be a little bit better. But even then, we're not even. This is like a digital. I did a screen capture off my iPad. So this isn't even printing. This is just on a bright iPad screen.
Mm.
Yeah, so that backlit white really, really illustrates those different tones. Too much so, in a way.
Yeah, and again, to be fair, like, it's the newsprint is kind of crappy and it's faded over time. But like, so I don't know how bright this yellow was on the newsprint back then, but like, wow, the
Nah, that's right.
difference the difference is stark between
Yeah.
these two.
Especially
And
the kids.
I think that green is a little ugly. The bright fluorescent green.
It's pretty intense.
But yeah, here's Janson's color guide. Nowadays, everything is done by like a colorist. Everything is done pretty much by one person. Well, somebody will do the flats, and then but like artistically, it's all done by one person. Whereas back then, somebody created on physical paper, created a color guide, and then handed it to like a technician to basically cut out the colors and apply them onto the board for the final printing. So here we have a color guide where you can see he writes all the color codes on the art to be interpreted by the technicians, basically. And it should be noted that colorists at this time only had access to 64 colors. Yeah, and so this is the color guide, and then the newsprint. So I don't know how accurate the newsprint was back then, because again, this is faded significantly. But
It doesn't
but
look too
yeah.
far off.
Well, and
Ooh.
interestingly, this I don't know. What do you guys think of this?
Okay, so panel 4, that bottom corner yellow, like why? Why would you even?
Yeah, that one's too much. The rest are great.
The rest is.
I
the
think
rest is
overall
not-
this page reads pretty nice.
But my eye goes right there as soon as it flips up.
Yeah, and the
Yeah, and
pinkish
looking at the
magenta reds are kind of weird, but
yeah, the fire is interesting. The fire was specified to be orange and yellow, and for some reason they added a violet or a purple in there and a red.
Mm.
And that's another thing is everybody's on a deadline. So with this color guide, you look at that fire and he's got some pretty complex shapes. But when it gets to the people applying they're like using X-Acto knives and cutting out pieces of color and pasting them down, and you get some awkward shapes that don't fully match what the guide said, because you gotta get this stuff out the door
it's a pretty neat process though.
from a bygone era.
Yeah, it's neat
Yeah.
to approach printing like that. When you think about it now and you think that's a huge pain in the ass, but that's what they had, right?
Yeah. So this is interesting because in around 2000, 2001, Marvel started integrating modern digital coloring into their comics, and they experimented with remastering classic works. And so they got they got colorist Steve Buccellato to sort of, I guess, remaster the coloring. He took the actual palette, but just added these gradients all throughout to adjust the lighting. And so you can see that these yellow highlights have been added to Daredevil's body here. And there are gradients added to the backgrounds as well. And yeah, like again, here's the newsprint versus the modern remastering, and then we get the modern remastering compared to what Steve Buccellato did in 2001. Take a look at that sky.
Yeah, I like
Yeah.
that. Is a lot better than Steve Buccellado's, it looks like, right? Is that the right side?
Yeah, Steve
Yeah.
Buccellato did the right side.
Yeah, I quite like that a lot more.
To be honest, I'd go for the left. I would have preferred they could just kept that printing.
Yeah,
I don't know, something about that. Like if you go back to the Daredevil splash page, how it's just flat red. It's just, I don't know, more appealing to me to see it that way than, you know, there's a bit of, I mean, the gradation, I think it works, but I want to keep the feeling of it old, if you know what I mean.
yeah, I see what you mean. I'm just so conflicted because like it is supposed to look
Yeah, of course.
like this, and the bright red can be a bit of an eyesore. But so like, you know, gradients can be kind of ugly as well.
Yeah.
When Photoshop was like all, you know, it was new, and this is what modern comics looks like. We can do anything and everything, and so there was gradients everywhere, and so yeah, it can be a bit ugly to me.
Glossy paper retains its color forever, pretty much, right?
Yeah,
So it
and
will always
so
look like that.
what's interesting is like if you have read a reprint of this Daredevil run over the past like 25 years, you've seen the Buccellato colors. It was only like the last couple of years that they reintroduced the one on the left when
Hey,
they
Dave, actually,
came
the
out
trade.
with
Sorry,
the Masterworks.
Dave, the trade paperback you got the other day. Do you have it on hand? Can you just quickly flip through and see which printing it is?
Oh, that's definitely that is the Steve Buccellato colors, I think.
I can read it right now. That's it. Yeah, it says color
I
reconstruction.
stupidly.
Mary Javins and Steve Buccellato. There's a bunch of people.
So it'd be the one on the right. Yeah.
That's fascinating that Marie Javins is credited in there because at the moment she's editor-in-chief at DC Comics.
Oh yeah.
So
wild journey.
Yeah, it's that just goes to show like anybody in the production line can eventually work their way up. Be nice to everybody in the industry, people.
Yeah. Especially me, Colin.
Always bullying Dave, Colin.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the third section of this, the final section, I just want to talk about the collaboration between Miller and Janson. So this is issue 172. You can see how tight Frank Miller's pencils are. Just compare Bullseye's back on this fourth panel to like compare the lighting that Janson did. So yeah, Janson is still doing a fair amount, but these pencils are very tight.
What was their work dynamic? Did they share a studio?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. They both lived in New York. Back then, like you pretty much had to live in New York to work for Marvel Comics, with some exceptions, like Barry Windsor Smith, I think, was in England for his Conan run. But yeah, they worked very closely. So that was early on in their run. I just wanted to say that like Miller has a long history with collaborators taking his sort of rough, almost ugly work and making it more appealing for mass audiences. Most notably, Lynn Varley and of course Klaus Janson. But I find that when he isn't working with Varley or Janson, there's a bit of a fan backlash when they're not like, you know, ironing out his rough edges. Yeah, I should say that I love his solo work. One of my favorite things he's ever done was this 2-page story for a French magazine, and it's just all him. He did the, you know, pencils, inks, even the text. So this is kind of an example of like how sort of rough his stuff can look. It definitely doesn't look very mainstream, and you can kind of understand why like fans would not want this kind of style on their Batman comic,
I
which is
always love
why
the sound
like
effects in this one.
Which is
oh yeah,
because this would make a good Batman comic.
oh yeah, amazing. But
Working
like
style, you'd be like, this is one of the best things ever.
yeah, but you know the fans want Klaus Janson to make it a little more palatable. So by the time they got to like 183, the pencils were getting a little more rough. And again, you can see that like Janson is doing quite a bit of the heavy lifting when it comes to the lighting. Yeah, Janson just seems to be a master of lighting the human form.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
Was this the only thing Miller was working on at the time, or did he get more work around here? Obviously, he was getting more and more popular around the 180s.
Yeah, he was very in demand. By the end of his Daredevil run, I think when 191, his last issue came out, that same month, there was a Wolverine issue with
Chris Claremont,
finishes, yeah, written by Chris Claremont, but yeah, it had finishes by
Rubenstein.
yes,
Yeah.
and there was also a What If issue, which was inked by Terry Austin. So yeah, in that month, there were 3 Frank Miller comics on the stands. So for the first part of their run, Miller was credited as penciler and Janson as inker. In the middle of their run, Miller was credited with story and art, and Janson was credited with finished art. And then in the last several issues of their run together, Miller was so busy that he had to give more of the art chores to Janson. Miller was credited as scripter storyteller, and Janson was credited as penciler, inker, colorist. At this time, Miller would provide layouts for Janson to work with. But these are the layouts that he would hand Klaus Janson. And yeah, you could see that, especially here, like look at Elektra's face here. You can see how Miller's is very stylized with the big lips. And you can see how Janson kind of like, I think makes it a little more mainstream, probably a little bit more palatable.
Probably use photo reference for that too.
Feels a little more Buscema.
Yeah. There's also I wondered, like, it's always a little unfair to compare roughs because roughs always have more energy, but we're going to do that unfair thing and compare the roughs to the finished anyway. But look at the acting difference on Elektra's face in the last panel.
Yeah.
So she's being asked, you know, if she wants or what she wants to do, and I think she's basically saying I want to be one of you guys. In one, you can see the acting she looks a little more tired or sad.
Yeah,
And
she's
in the
more stoic.
other, she's very stoic. Exactly. Yeah. So yeah, just interesting to note that like Janson was like putting a stamp on the acting as well. He was doing quite a bit. And again, like look at the face, the Miller style versus Janson style.
She's a little bit more glamorous looking in the layout, I'd say, and the last panel there.
Yeah.
But the overall acting is pretty much, I would say, is very similar.
Yeah. Now look at the lighting on this last panel. Like again, Janson is just so amazing when it comes to lighting the human figure and just finding the perfect mood.
Comics.
Yeah. Which that is an interesting interesting that you bring that up, Dave, because like if you wanted to work in comics, if you wanted to make a living, you around this time you had to be doing superhero stuff. If he was if he was in another era, would he be drawing horror comics right now?
I would hope so. Because they would look fantastic. Like, look at this. How could you not think that this just screams horror comic? I mean, minus the ninjas, I guess.
Yeah, so yeah, again, like it's interesting to compare the lighting and the acting a bit, because yeah, this is super rough what Miller is handing to him.
I do think Janson photo referenced a bit of this, quite a bit of this.
Oh yeah, back then they had something called a morgue file, which is just like basically a file folder of just all your reference. And so yeah, there was a lot of you know, you would just collect reference that you would pull out at the appropriate times. But yeah, look at the figure here in Miller's, where it's just sort of a 1 point perspective, like downward view, and then it's a little less of an aerial view in Janson's.
Man, that action is so good.
Yeah.
And yeah, look at Daredevil's face in the last panel.
Oh
He
yeah.
looks depressed.
Whereas here
Compared
he's more like
he's
shocked.
more
It's a heartbeat.
surprised. Yeah.
So yeah, this one's a little more appropriate. And again with the thinning of the lips, like Janson's style is he has more thin lips than on his females than Miller.
Yep. Miller loves to draw his bee stung lips.
But yeah, it's just a lot of fun to compare this stuff. This is an interesting one because I was a little confused by this page when I read it. Because so Daredevil is sitting there he interrupted the process of Elektra coming back to life, and he's like, let me try and do what they were doing. And then the last panel, I was like, so it's all silent. And then in the fourth panel, I was confused by what was happening to Daredevil. I think it's more clear in Miller's layout here because you get the lines here denoting he's moving, and he just looks exhausted. Whereas here, you don't really get a full sense of the movement, and I wouldn't say that's an exhausted look. That's more of it looks like he was being shocked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then you figure it out, obviously, in the last panel. In the last panel, he clearly looks like he passed out. And yeah, this is where Janson basically said, like, screw it, I'm going to change the entire view of the character, which I think it flows a lot better because
He made
the very next
executive
page, you
decision.
get the big reveal.
Yeah.
You know what I love is in these images is the use of screen tone to create like these overlaying shadow effects is really cool.
Yeah, on that subject, Janson talked around this time a lot about how he loved using the use of screen tones, mixing it with his colors. The gray of the screen tone can create an extra color that otherwise wasn't available to them. And yeah, he loved just playing around with that and making it look unlike any other comic on the stands at the time. But on that note, he was also doing overlays, which was extra work. But yeah, he tried to do it often, where he would do separate layers. Basically, there's the CMYK printing process, and then where you would put the C on top of the Y and all four on top, and then they would add an extra plate for the new color, and so you see this background Daredevil becomes completely blue. So that would be the extra plate they would add.
Oh, cool.
Basically, that's how they did color holds back then. Nowadays with Photoshop, it's just you just select that area and then just turn the black into whatever color you want. But back then you had to do separate layers. Janson did that a lot. You can see that a lot throughout the run. Yeah, not a lot of comics look like that. These guys were young, and they were putting their all into this run.
Yeah, I know. I've heard stories of Miller actually going to the printing presses to oversee kind of how the colors are looking as it's coming out.
Yeah, I mean, he was one of the first to basically say, "Can we start doing glossy paper?" Like we romanticize newsprint, but back then that's all they had. They had that for what, like 60 years, 70 years of comics,
Yeah.
and so they were just like sick of it. And so right after his Daredevil run, he does Ronin, and Ronin was done on glossy paper, and he kind of like spearheaded that revolution. And on the note of the color holds, you can see here this is interesting because the What If issue that came around that time was inked by Terry Austin, and it has some repetitive images from the Death of Elektra issue. So you can compare Klaus Janson inking over Miller and Terry Austin inking over Miller, and you can see here Janson was all about the color holds, and he was just going all out. So he wanted this crazy color hold added, and it's just very effective.
Yeah, it's super cool. It's very graphic.
So this is interesting because this is one page inked by Klaus Janson and another inked by Terry Austin. So it is interesting to see the differences. So they took a couple of scenes from the Death of Elektra and put it in the What If issue. So it's interesting to see the different inkers. But like, look at Foggy's face, for example.
Yeah.
Also, you have screen tones used on Elektra's face in Klaus Janssen's, and then there isn't much used for Terry Austin. I think on her face here, I don't know if that's a screen tone. That might be the side of the pencil,
Panel 3, yeah.
but I'm not entirely sure. But yeah, it's just fun to see the differences, especially like look at a Klaus Janson Frank Miller face and a Terry Austin Frank Miller face.
Yeah, there's a very different amount of life in each one.
I love them both.
Yeah, they're both pretty amazing. And like, yeah, this is an example where the inkers back then did a lot more than just like trace as from, as they say, from Chasing Amy or whatever. By the time it got to the Image era, the pencils were so tight that there wasn't a lot of freedom for the inkers to do much. But for the longest time, the inkers actually did quite a bit more. For instance, here you can see the lighting choices are entirely chosen by the inkers, pretty much. The final issue of Daredevil wasn't inked by Janson. It was inked by Terry Austin. So it is interesting. I'm not entirely sure, but I think Janson is more of a brush guy and Terry Austin's more of a pen guy. And that might explain some of the major differences here.
Yeah, it could be.
And I just wanted to show off this. This is fun. This is Jeff Durow inking over Frank Miller for this trade paperback cover.
For one time only, right?
Yeah, I think the only time they've ever worked together. Like generally, you don't see Jeff Durow ink over anybody.
But you could totally tell it's his inking.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah, it's got that like excess. Like, look at the amount of bullets, bullet casings. So next up, I just want to look at a handful of scenes from some of the individual issues. I've got a bunch of issues up on the Kindle app here. Yeah, is there any stuff you guys want to look at?
169, I think, if you have that up. Yeah. Okay, cool.
This is the second issue that he wrote.
Well, let's take a scroll through, but I'll make you stop where. In fact, that what's his name? Bernie Krigstein?
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go, right there. So at the bottom of the first page there, 6 panels across, same thing. He's kind of doing the, seconds in time.
Yeah.
I thought there were 2 of those in this issue, but the one I'm thinking of, it's a guy trying to climb a fence and he falls on the other side. It's probably not in this issue.
Oh, yeah, that might be a different issue. I think that might have been in the Roger McKenzie run, but I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Miller was very inspired by Bernie Krigstein. This scene I love. This guy is basically using this opportunity to kill his kidnapper, Bullseye, and so he's about to smash him over the head, and I love it where you can see his word balloons all throughout, and then I think in a worse comic, his word balloon would basically say, "No, I'm too afraid to do this," and he'd back away. But the visuals tell you everything you need to tell. He's just too afraid.
The color change throughout the panel is really great too, setting off that mood as well. It's like not 100% necessary, but I do kind of like the 2 panels in the middle being red. Yeah,
the red is such an important color for like danger and red alert. So that's when the scene is at its most dangerous, and then it slowly returns back to the yellow. So yeah, it's very well done.
Yeah.
In the original coloring, I think it's a direct, just like flat yellow, flat orange, red, flat orange, and then flat yellow. But this just like turns it into a gradient. Sorry, what were you gonna say, Colin?
I said over-explanation was pretty rampant in comics back then too. He was the one that started to turn the tide, or at least change the medium a little bit to head more in this direction. Yeah,
just like I feel like it's a respect for your audience, basically. I guess Miller respected the audience a little more, and I think whenever you can have the text contradict the visuals, or the visual communicate something that the text isn't explaining, that's when visual storytelling is at its best, because the the reader or the viewer can come to their own conclusions, and they're more involved in the story. And this is a prime example of that. But yeah, we can maybe look at I just want to quickly look at issue 174, because I think this is one of the most exciting comics I've ever read. And I don't want to show too much of this comic, because if anybody is watching this who hasn't read this, I recommend you find this either digitally or find it in trade, and just treat yourself, because this is a roller coaster ride. I think this is one of the best fight scenes I've ever seen in a comic. So everything culminates into this fight at the end, where Daredevil and Elektra end up in this in this shop where all these ninjas are undercover. So I have this theory that there's two different ways of drawing fight scenes in comics. And obviously there's more than that, but I think primarily, for the most part, there's these two approaches. Like 95% of the time there's these two. I think there's the Jack Kirby, Jim Lee sort of frenetic, in your face, lots of foreshortening approach. Most of the information comes across in just one panel. The cuts between panels don't necessarily have to make sense, because the scenes are supposed to be moving faster than you can sort of figure out what's going on. It's supposed to feel exciting. And then there's the sort of like Frank Miller approach, which is a more deliberate choreography, where there's a fixed camera view, and you can tell very clearly what's going on from point A to point B to point C. In this, you get a lot of that, where you get like a fixed camera, point A, point B, and then you get, like right here, you get like the camera in one position over 4 panels. And I think it creates for a very exciting comic. This is amazing. She's going up the stairs, and then you get her backlit, but then she ducks as he shows up. So yeah, the sort of Frank Quitely approach is like my favorite approach. I did something. I used this approach in a graphic novel I did called Eternal. But yeah, just to further that theory, I recall when Jackie Chan started making movies in Hollywood. There was this discussion about how martial arts scenes were filmed in Asia versus America. Jackie Chan would choreograph his action scenes to be done in one camera take, but he was told by the director in the States that American audiences wanted fast cuts with multiple angles. So I kind of see that as analogous to the two different approaches in comic book fight scenes. But yeah. I don't want to show any more of this comic. I just like implore people, go out and find issue 175 and give it a read. It's just fantastic.
You got to go to 188, The Widow's Bite. Oh, yeah. Look at that. What a great issue.
Great cover.
Yeah, the cover's great. It's such a cool introduction of, like, you know, Black Widow into the Daredevil storyline. There's such great scenes throughout. And, you know, as you were talking about the two different styles of the way to illustrate an action sequence, you know, I find going back to this, I find this much more entertaining and in a lot of ways easier to digest than like the Jim Lee kind of style of action, which is very flashy, but I find there's more substance in something like this. And not to say anything bad about Jim Lee's art, it's fantastic, and his action sequences are really fun to read. And that similar style is great. But for myself, when I'm digesting this, I like the continuity that comes from this approach.
Definitely, yeah.
So much more. Like, you can tell throughout the scenes as they're going, like, what's happening, right? Like, and how one panel ties into the next panel so nicely. Like, and I will say, I think this was when Frank Miller was doing a lot more just rough thumbnailing.
Yeah, exactly.
And, Janson's taking over with the actual like layouts, not the layouts, but the figure work itself. He would make his adjustments there, and I love his line of actions that he puts in his figures, like the way he draws legs. It's very clear, it's very concise. His gesture work is freaking awesome.
Yeah, look at the line of action in this panel.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's nuts. And it's throughout the whole book. Like, as you go through in the next few pages, he just like, there's a really cool action sequence where she's fighting who is she fighting?
Ninjas?
she drops into a panel, and then keep going. Yeah, these are the pages coming up. Yeah, here we go. So on the last page there, if you go back,
Oh, sorry, where?
this one here. Okay, so on the right side there, you see that line of action from her in the second panel down after she drops in. The way she's kicking behind her, and she's kicking that guy in the face. But in behind the word balloons of that same panel, there's a guy
Oh yeah.
running up from the background, who she then reacts to in the second panel. Like it's so subtle, but like really cool how that the continuity is from panel to panel.
Oh yeah.
Fighting the guy on the right. I love that.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's so subtle. I hadn't noticed that, but yeah, it's great.
And what's really cool is like, as you were saying, like the panel counts have been reduced, right? But because they're doing things like doing the 4 horizontal panels, it leaves lots of room to illustrate as much action as you can and have that continuity and give it that more cinematic feel. You've got one continuous shot, and you could, like, in your mind's eye, it's easy to see this like animated or acted out, and it makes sense. That action sequence is so well choreographed, and it is so clear, not just in the choreography, but like each panel is illustrated. It's not overpopulated. The blacks make each figure read really nicely. It's
Also, he does a good job in this first panel here, setting up everybody in the room. You got
Yeah.
green guy, you got you got pink guy or pinkish purple, and then you got blue guy, and we get to see her take down all 3 of these people.
yeah. There's great like the continuity is incredible in these. Like not just for the great story overall, but like the fact that in each panel, like it's the same guys each time. Like they're very, very conscious of like keeping things accurate throughout each panel, which is really cool.
Yeah. So let's just want to quickly look at. I just want to comment that artists get certain ticks, and I think there's a certain layout that became kind of his trademark around this time. He would always do this long vertical panel, and then a whole bunch of wide panels on the right, and or on the left. So you get the tall vertical and the tall vertical, and like. This became like through the entire run you get a lot of this. I should note that Alan Moore parodied around this shortly after he left Daredevil. Alan Moore parodied, let me see if I can pull that up. Alan Moore created a parody comic which people should track down and read after everybody's read the Daredevil run. Try and read this parody comic because it's a lot of fun.
Who draws that?
Who did draw this?
Mike
this
Collins?
was Mike Collins, yeah. But yeah, I recommend people track that down. There's just one more issue I want to talk about, and then I guess we can move on to the next segment. I just wanted to focus on like my favorite issue of the entire run, which was 179. As I was reading this issue, I felt like this issue was a game changer. When I say that, like, this run is the link between sort of the Silver Age style of storytelling and modern storytelling. I felt that with this issue for a lot of reasons. For one, this is Janson's first time coloring, and actually, in my opinion, even when it's like oversaturated, it works in ways that some of the earlier issues didn't. Like, these colors are absolutely gorgeous, even as they're saturated. And to be fair, on the Kindle app here, we're looking at the Steve Buccellato remastering. But yeah, there's this is the first time he's using captions as a narration. This is Ben Urich narrating, basically like it's from his journal or whatever. I think he still used thought balloons a little bit after this, but like this is him slowly basically destroying thought balloons. And about 20 years after this, Joe Quesada becomes editor-in-chief at Marvel and basically says, like, no more thought balloons. We're done with that. And it's just gone, and it has never really come back. But I think Miller was the first to start doing this, start taking it away. So I just want to comment on a couple of cool storytelling sequences. Janson talks about this in a bunch of interviews. I think this is like his go-to when Klaus Janson's a teacher, and for a while he focused on telling stories, and so he would always comment on the storytelling in this particular sequence. This is a sequence where Ben Urich's wife is basically saying, you know, you put too much time into the job. It would be nice if we can spend more time together. And he basically says, like, tonight it's all about the two of us. And then this phone interrupts it, and the phone is like angled in such a way that it's like towering over them in this oppressive way. And yeah, he picks it up and he's basically saying, okay, I'm gonna go back to the job. And you can see that she's like framed in such a way that she seems like she's in prison, the bed frame. And yeah, it's just such a beautiful way of communicating what everybody is feeling.
It's really clever.
And I also want to like this scene in particular I love as well, as Daredevil runs into this building and works his way up to the top, and you can see the sound effects is working his way up, and then there's this pause when we get this blank space, and it's supposed to create this excruciating pause as you don't know what's going on, and then everything is still except for the cigarette slowly burning. Just such effective storytelling. And then lastly, I just want to comment on this page. This page, this final page is perfect. This feels like Ben Urich is running in slow motion. This feels like
100%.
It does. Yeah, that's so cool.
and yeah, it's just you just add several more panels and it slows the reader down. And then even cutting this image into two makes things feel even slower as well, and then you get a fade to black. And it's
That
just
last
like
line, that last
yes.
line really clinches it. He
Yeah.
wasn't fast enough.
Yeah, and the coughing and the cigarettes and everything is just like, yeah, it's just masterful storytelling. And I think one of my favorite comics of all time, one of my favorite issues of all time is this one, just because of everything it does and just how beautiful it is and everything it represents. But yeah, is there anything else you guys wanted to go over? Or?
I do. Yeah, you know, we were talking the other day about our favorite issues of all time, and then I read issue 190 with
190
Elektra Resurrection, and I was like, how is this not one of my favorites? After reading it and just seeing, you know, really trying to digest it, right? As we've been talking about Miller's approach to making things seem more like they're on film or cinema, this issue in particular really stands out to me for that reason, because as you're going through, obviously it's the introduction of Elektra mountain climbing, right? And like, oh, and back to this, the screen tones to create different tones in the ice in the mountain, like the mountain is so cool. And it's like something I wouldn't have thought of, right? Which is it's really neat to see these different approaches and then try to steal them and then take inspiration from them. But we were talking about his one thing of doing, you know, the one vertical layout panel and then like all the horizontal panels stacked beside it. But on these two pages, the vertical panels, I find it's really challenging to do like back-to-back pages of vertical panels.
Oh yeah, you're so limited in what you can do.
And I thought like right off the bat, this has such a cool like introduction of like in a like the way a movie would open up, right? To have like these really cool vertical panels and then like, you know, her plummet, and it's super interesting to look at. And then as you go on, you know, obviously you see this introduction, but the lighting, you know, it's really dynamic. The contrast is really cool. But if you go forward, I think okay, so this page where she's like, they're all lit up by the fence. It's like, it reminds me of something out of Kill Bill. Like, you know, like Tarantino was definitely looking at a lot of like martial arts movies and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. You can tell Miller was too.
Oh yeah, he definitely was. Yeah.
Yeah. Like this is so cool. Like just how like they've got the cast shadows of the grates on them and stuff like that. I love that. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's a beautiful shot.
Yeah, and then you know as you go through, obviously we looked at the 2 pages of the of Stone and Daredevil in the graveyard as Elektra is being dug up by the hand, and it's just like I love this credit scene. It just seems like a movie, you know, like you've got Stanley Presents Resurrection, and then on the tombstones, like all their credits, and they're just framed by all these jumping ninjas, right? Like it's just super
coming out of the ground.
Like, yeah, you know, you read this, and in some ways, you kind of like think, man, they don't make comics like this anymore.
Yeah, we're I mean, this was an action book. Like, there's a lot of conversations about how like Miller created. He turned it into a crime book, and for the most part, he did. But in my personal opinion, he just made the best action comic on the stands at the time.
Yeah,
Probably
Yeah.
one of the best action comics ever.
yeah, and like my comment was a bit tongue in cheek. There's lots of fantastic comics out there, like Jeff DeRoe doing Shaolin Cowboy, right? Like seeing the
Oh
action
yeah.
sequences through that, like you can't say that there's not great action in comics, right? Like, but looking at the simplistic page layout sometimes, like you see a lot of comic artists with their overlapping main central figure. What's that phrase for that? You call it
An anchor image.
right, right, and so that's really prevalent in modern comics, right? But in this, like you see none of that, right? And um, I feel like that would overdo it. Like the simplicity of these allows the action to breathe more, and you get a lot more consistency in the choreography in that, right? There's a lot more opportunity to work from scene to scene to scene, and this action of Daredevil like jumping through the door and and ambushing Injun Joe and his four friends is so awesome. But like just like as he's punching behind him and he's throwing the kick forward and like it's you can see it playing out in your mind so well.
What
And
gets me is how quickly they were on a monthly schedule, and
I don't understand how you can just choreograph these things so quickly and so well.
yeah, when I was choreographing the stuff in Eternal, it took so long to. I mean, maybe I'm just not as much a natural as these guys, but it was a long time to figure it out and make it work. But these guys are just like, every 30 days they're pumping this out and creating an amazing action scene every month.
Yeah. And so, obviously as we're talking about, like, we don't have to go through the whole book, but like just the build up to her being resurrected, and then you can see amazingly them jumping through like the stained glass window. Like it's cool, man. There's so many
Just like fun
opportunities
comics.
for awesome, right? And if you were to like watch this play out in your mind, like yeah, on a static image, it's visually interesting, but like you can easily translate that in your imagination to being like a live action sequence or an animated sequence.
You can even notice that being in slow motion. Just the way the glass is shattering and everything coming
Oh
down
yeah,
on them. Yeah.
yeah, super cool. You
Yeah.
can definitely see why people want to adapt Miller's work into movies because it just translates so well. It's so natural to want to do so.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I saw on Twitter somebody like years ago, somebody asked if this run came out today, would it still be loved? And yeah, 100%, I think.
100%.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't read any of this stuff before until like recently, and now reading it, I'm like, this is amazing. Like, how could you not like this? It aged really well, looks fantastic, and it's super dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I find I struggle with that with like earlier books, like Batman Nightfall. I found was like freaking slog to get through. I found that one didn't age well for me at all. But reading all these past Daredevils, they're freaking awesome.
Well,
Yeah, no.
this is actually, side note, this is probably the hill that Eric and I will die on, is that Miller's greatest work is Elektra Lives Again. And this should be recorded as the time before Dave read Elektra Lives Again and then after read Elektra Lives Again, so that all three of us can die on that same hill.
Yeah.
But there's only one way to read it. You have to read it in the oversized hardcover.
Yeah.
It's just not the same without. But yeah, we're going to definitely have a future episode on Elektra Lives Again because it's just great comics, and that's what we're here for, to talk about great comics, right?
Heck yeah. Heckin' yes. So every week, or 2 weeks or whatever, as we try to pump out content for this, we come up with an idea of like what to review for our episode. And so we were really drawn to obviously these Daredevil ones, and I'd drawn up an Elektra image, and then these guys wanted to copy me and draw their own Elektra images, which is cool, I guess. But it gives us a good chance to try to explore storytelling and try to create a dynamic image, or just try to draw somebody we're not typically somebody we wouldn't normally draw, like because often times like we have our own interests and stuff like that. So I've been trying to pick characters for myself that I don't typically gravitate towards, but I would find a challenge. So I drew up Elektra in her Daredevil costume. Oh, look at that! It's not going. Oh, there we go. This is. Oh, look at that! The
Oh, wow, look at those ink washes.
the confusing way of trying to mirror this and or show this on
That's
here.
probably the third or fourth best thing you ever drew.
Yeah, Colin's got a regular list in his head.
Thanks,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well,
that one's been that one I really tried to find a balance because I've been really influenced by Matteo Scalera, but also Olivier Coipel.
Oh
And
yeah.
I just love
yeah.
their works, and I'm sure I butchered their names, but I just love it. Like it's super dynamic, and the different tones and shades and moods you can affect with different grays is just so much fun. That as an artist who tattoos a lot of black and gray, it's a really natural progression for me in transition to try to draw with shades of gray as well.
right on.
And how do you prep those grays?
So I make washes. So I take a bottle. I have 3 bottles, and then I basically just add little bits of black and then dilute it until I get the desired shade. And I don't have a recipe, but I need to figure a recipe out so that I'm consistent from day to day. But my bottles, they last a really long time. Like I took these 3 bottles and filled them up, and it's been months and I haven't used them. So they definitely last a really long time when you pre-make your washes.
Cool.
Should I go next?
Yeah, well, what did you get done, Colin? So we should preface that Colin has only been drawing regularly for about what, 8 months, 6 months? Like
Yeah, I'm pretty early in my artistic journey, but just to go off what Dave said, so every week we are going to draw a character based on the theme of the episode. So Dave did Elektra, but I actually ended up doing Daredevil. And it's the Daredevil from, like, the costume from the Man Without Fear movie. Or not movie, sorry, miniseries. So in the Netflix show, he's shown with like black jeans, I think, and like steel toe boots and like a black long sleeve shirt. And he's got his forearms all bandaged up. But in the Man Without Fear series, he's just wearing black sweats. So I kind of went with that and gave him like gray jogging shorts and a hoodie and construction work gloves. But I kept the cane that he had. It was a pretty cool cane. It was just white, but it had chiseled out, or not chiseled out, a drawstring at the end. What do you call those strings? The strings that like it's like a handle string, so it doesn't slip from you.
Oh,
Handle string, so it doesn't slip.
You know, it's
I think that's the
a
technical
handle
word
string.
for
You
it.
can see it on my. Anyway.
yeah. Was it a big struggle for you, or?
Yeah,
Become
I actually
easy?
had 2 false starts, and then I came up with this. The thing is, so I'm struggling with. I draw too big, and then I get too ambitious, and then I run into problems that way. So now I'm trying to. I mean, Eric and I talked about it. And he told me to just start small. So now I'm just kind of doing a single figure illustrations for this show, and in terms of like sequential storytelling, I'm going to just start small as well. Probably try to do like one panel, telling a story in one panel, and then try 2 panels and so on. So
Yeah, something I like about us doing this show is that it creates a deadline for us. I don't have time to do fan art. I've got a comic I'm drawing, but I want to be doing this stuff so much. I want to play with. I've really been playing with watercolor quite a bit, and so this forces me to make time to do it. So hopefully I'll be able to keep up every week, but I might fall behind or whatever. But yeah, for this, I ended up doing an Elektra. This is a mix of watercolor and markers.
Very cool.
And it was not done on watercolor paper, so the the watercolors are kind of like bending the
Oh, so
paper.
rolled a bit. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, I had a lot of fun working on this. Figuring out the palette is always the challenge, and yeah,
Yeah.
I think I like how it turned out.
That's probably like the 5th or 6th best thing you ever did.
What's number one?
There was a Wolverine you did. He had like arrows sticking out of him and stuff. That one comes to mind right away. You sold that at the Calgary Con the other month.
Oh, somebody
The
walked away
original.
with the best thing I've ever done. Oh no.
Yeah. Thus far,
Probably
still got more time ahead of you than behind you. So.
your Jean Grey and Sentinel piece. It's up there.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, well that's the
That's
piece
probably
that got the
top
most
3 for
attention.
sure. Yeah.
Plus you paid big money for it. Ooh.
Yeah, what should I say, that all this art is for sale if anybody's interested in buying. Every week we're going to show off a new piece, and
Yeah.
you know, if anybody's interested in buying this stuff, who knows, reach out. But yeah, I guess we should wrap it up. We're going to try to keep this show weekly. Yeah, it's just a lot of fun for us to get together and hang out and talk about this stuff. I don't live in the same province as these guys anymore, so this is my excuse to once a week see their beautiful, beautiful faces, and also talk comics, and do some art. But next week, I think we're going to do something a little bit different. It'll probably be a shorter episode, and we'll just talk about our favorite artists that draw tech and how that inspires our art. And then we're all going to draw something tech related, maybe an Iron Man or a War Machine, and then maybe we can discuss how those artists influenced our approaches.
Yeah, I'll be doing War Machine for that one. War Machine's my guy.
I'm just doing Iron Man, honestly, because I was commissioned to do it, and you know, I have to do the piece anyway, so we're gonna fit it into an episode.
I'm doing Iron Man as well. Which version? Who knows?
To be continued. Yeah.
Hey, don't forget to like and subscribe. All the links down below. All our social media and everything.